What's up, Buck? Doug with D&E in the garage. Today we're going to do part 2 on our alternate Jeep history video. If you didn't watch the first one, I highly recommend you go and do it because you're going to have a much better idea what I'm talking about if you do, but I'll give you a brief synopsis of what we're going to be talking about today. We're trying to figure out what the Jeep brand would look like today, or what it would have looked like over time if Chrysler had not purchased Jeep in 1987, but another company did. In the previous video, we talked about Ford and Chevy. In this video, we're going to talk about 3 additional companies and what it would have looked like if those companies purchased Jeep instead of the Chrysler Corporation. All right, now to properly establish these theories, we're going to look at the same criteria for each company. We're going to look at what the Wrangler would look like, what the Comanche, the Cherokee, the Wagoneer, the Grand Cherokee would all look like, as they were the brands most immediately affected by the purchase. We're also going to look at the 4-liter, the Jeep tradition of putting solid front axles in, and what the brand would look like after the year 2000. All right, the first company we're going to talk about is Daimler Benz. All right, now this may seem like a left field possible landing spot for the Jeep brand, but it's not. All right, let me explain. In 1997, Daimler Benz merged with the Chrysler Corporation, all right, to form Daimler Chrysler. All right, the whole purpose of this merger was so that Mercedes could appeal to a less affluent customer base and find a way to sell more vehicles in the United States. And of course, Chrysler was trying to benefit from a more successful auto brand than they were at that moment. All right, Chrysler in '97 is just barely back from the brink, thanks to Lee Iacocca, my own personal hero. So it's not absurd to assume that a decade earlier, Chrysler or Daimler may have already been considering this. 1987, the AMC Corporation's going under, Jeep comes up for sale. In this timeline, Daimler purchases the Jeep brand. All right, now I think the first thing that they would want to do would be to streamline the brand. This isn't going, in this timeline, Jeep does not end up as prominent in the auto industry as it does in our actual timeline or in the Ford and Chevy timelines that we talked back in the last video. They are kind of a subset. Let me explain. First thing they do, they kill off the Cherokee, the Comanche, and the Wagoneer. It's sad, but I don't think that they would have any need for those platforms. It's possible those nameplates come back later on, but they get killed off almost immediately. The Wrangler is allowed to stay as it is. The YJ remains exactly as it is. You get a refresh for the TJ the same time we did in our timeline. You get a refresh for the JK the same time in our timeline. The difference is they start taking more of a Land Rover type turn. All right, think the Mercedes G-Wagon. Yes, still a rugged, capable off-road vehicle, still a solid frame, body-on-frame design, but you start getting more amenities. Maybe they do things to increase ride quality. Talking about solid independent front suspension, solid front axles go out the window. They probably keep the 4-liter around as an option. More likely they change it out for a more efficient V6, something from one of their World Car platforms. But the Wrangler does keep its identity, and that's cool. The Grand Cherokee becomes the flagship of the entire brand. This is what they do. All right, in '93 they released the ZJ as it was designed. When AMC sold Jeep, the ZJ was pretty much ready to go. It was all designed. AMC designed the ZJ Grand Cherokee 100%. Chrysler was smart enough to not mess with it. I think Daimler would have the same instincts. They leave it as it is. But just like Chrysler did, they give it small facelifts and upgrades as the models go on. And the reason they're doing this is they're building up and doing market research for their own SUV that comes out in 1998, the Mercedes M-Class. When that comes out in 1998, the Grand Cherokee and the M-Class platforms merge, and from then on, those two vehicles operate in parallel. The M-Class is the Mercedes M-Class, the upscale SUV for the consumer of means, and the Grand Cherokee remains a rugged, everyman car, off-road capability. They're on the same platform. They probably look very similar, different badging and some different amenities and a vastly different price, obviously, and this would make the Grand Cherokee and the M-Class incredibly successful. All right, there's a version of that platform then for just about everybody who would be interested in an SUV at this time. This would be the major benefit to Mercedes, to Daimler, from buying Jeep. Of course, it's sad that so many of the Jeep nameplates go away, but the Grand Cherokee remains as popular as it is in our actual timeline. The Wrangler gets to stick around and arguably remains as popular as it did in our timeline. And most likely we get some other vehicles shipped over here to the United States that are basically Daimler products rebranded as Jeeps. Now that sounds scary. I'm thinking an all-wheel drive version of the E-Class that maybe gets the Wagoneer nameplate. I'm thinking maybe the A-Class, they could try to call it a Cherokee. They send that over here. The whole purpose of buying Jeep is for Mercedes to find a way to sell more of their products in the United States and to appeal to a larger customer base. So I think it's absolutely reasonable to assume they're going to merge some Jeep names with their platforms, send some other cars over here, and try to get a foothold in different markets than they have previously. I do think that in this timeline, Jeep ends up sold off at some point, to whom I cannot even begin to guess, but I don't think Mercedes would end up wanting to keep the brand long term. Maybe they end up selling them to Chrysler. It's important to note that in this timeline, Daimler Chrysler never exists. Mercedes has their handful with Jeep, and Jeep has somewhat accomplished what they wanted to. Daimler Chrysler does not exist, so we do not get vehicles like the first gen Compass. We don't get vehicles with Mercedes influence like the WK and the WK2. It's hard to say then where we do end up after the 2008 recession. Hopefully we get sold to somebody and they want to keep us on. I honestly think that the logical conclusion to this timeline is Fiat Chrysler ends up with Jeep anyway. Which is cool. So we end up kind of back where we started without a lot of the stuff that happened in the middle, and maybe we get lucky enough that Fiat Chrysler starts bringing back some of the nameplates and returning some things to how they were previously. The Wrangler, you know, it probably is irreversibly changed. The image of the Wrangler, it doesn't retain that CJ bare bones ruggedness image that it has. It carries on and it acquires more of the modern SUV image of being like a luxury vehicle that also can go off-road. So the brand ends up alive, which is important because if you remember from video 1, not all timelines end with Jeep still existing in 2018 today. So we end up still existing. We've lost most of our models that we all know from the AMC years. But some other models do well. The Grand Cherokee, hands down, as merged with the M-Class, does phenomenally well in this timeline, and that's probably what Jeep is known for in the future, the Grand Cherokee and just about only the Grand Cherokee. Moving on. This next one is difficult to talk about. Toyota. All right, I can make a case, and I'm about to make a case, that Toyota could have been a brand interested in purchasing Jeep in 1987 if Chrysler had not stepped in and done so. Now, this is difficult because if you haven't noticed, if you haven't seen any of our other videos, I hate Toyota. I really do. I know it's not totally rational. They're ugly, and just some of the worst drivers in the world happen to be driving like Prius and Camrys, and as a Jeep guy, I'm a natural enemy with the 4Runner and the Tacoma. I hate Toyota. I hate Toyota. That's all there is to it. It's my least favorite car brand, and now this was the hardest one to research, but I'm determined to do this, so here goes. I'm going to do my best to present this argument without crying. So, Toyota has an off-road pedigree, all right? Other than Jeep, they may be the company who's been most dedicated to building overland off-road vehicles. The FJ40, fun story, the FJ40 was originally called the Toyota Jeep until Jeep said, "Oh, you can't do that. That's a trademark name, you bunch of idiots." And so Toyota had to change it. But the FJ40 was built directly in response to the Jeep. The Japanese said, "Hey man, that Jeep's a badass little vehicle. We need to make one." And the FJ40 existed, and Toyota has since then always been the main rival of Jeep. So it's not unthinkable to assume that they might want to purchase the brand in 1987, utilize some of the platforms, certainly utilize some of the nameplates, and to really become the name in production off-road vehicles. So let's look. The first thing is the Wrangler pretty much stays as it is for the YJ. Somewhere around the TJ or the JK, it goes to unibody, and that's just the way Japanese companies do things. I can't see a Japanese company, solid front axle as well, goes away, independent front suspension. The YJ is allowed to live out to 96 as is because it's selling well, and then the refresh for the TJ, it goes to unibody, it goes to independent front suspension, and as the models of Wrangler progress, it starts looking less and less like a Wrangler. Think about the FJ Cruiser. The FJ Cruiser, when you look at it, it's a caricature of the FJ40 from the 60s, you know? It's like a goofy drawing of an FJ40, and that's what the Wrangler would have become. It's going to become a caricature of the CJ line. And it still looks like them, but like a goofy drawing of a CJ, a goofy drawing of what a child would think a Jeep looks like, you know? And by the time you get to the JK or the JL, it's unrecognizable from a Wrangler, though it is still being sold as a Wrangler. You move on to the Grand Cherokee. I think it's not released in 93. It's pushed out till about 95 because they rework it for independent front suspension. After that, it gets transferred onto the K platform, which is going to be your Sienna, your Camry, and also your Highlander. And from this point on, the Grand Cherokee and the Highlander are going to be on the same platform, and they're going to progress together. Now, Toyota did something interesting with a brand called Scion. They developed and created the brand Scion so that they could make more purpose-built cars to appeal to narrow market segments without having to pollute their own pool of vehicles. So Scion existed specifically to appeal to young crowds, young customers, all right? Now, I think what Toyota does with Jeep is they do the same thing, but everything Jeep is going to stay off-road, like it is today. That's what Jeep is known for. That's what Jeep's good at. They do off-road stuff. So if you want a small crossover SUV, you buy a Jeep. If you want a big SUV that goes off-road, you buy a Jeep if you're into the off-road thing. So Grand Cherokee and Highlander. Highlander's the grocery getter. The Jeep version, the Grand Cherokee, on the exact same platform with the same engines and everything, is going to be the off-road version, tow hooks, 2-inch lift, you know, all that stuff. The Cherokee is probably, as we know it, is allowed to live on probably until its natural death date, somewhere around 2000, 2001, like in our timeline. And this is painful to say, but the Cherokee ends up with the second-gen RAV4. So when the second-gen RAV4 comes out, I think that's 2000, those two vehicles get merged, and then from then on, same thing. You got the RAV4 as the grocery getter, the Cherokee on the exact same platform as the RAV4 is the off-road version. They give it a 2-inch lift, they give it tow hooks, they give it whatever else, and you know, if you want, you know, the RAV4 is probably less expensive. The the Cherokee's a little bit more. Those two continue on today. That's sad because I personally hate RAV4s. I think they're one of the ugliest vehicles on the planet. But the cool thing is they're still alive today. So both the Grand Cherokee's alive as the Highlander and the Cherokee's alive as the RAV4. Where it gets really interesting is the Comanche. Now, as I mentioned in a previous video, the Comanche is a very interesting truck because it's a unibody pickup truck. The cab is unibody. There's no frame underneath the cab of a Comanche. There's a subframe that supports the bed. That makes it a very nimble truck, excuse me, that handles well, but it affects the towing and payload capacity in a negative way. So I don't know that Toyota has any interest in continuing that particular body style, but what they do is they merge it with the Tacoma, and then they make Tacomas in the same factory in the United States. Why, you ask? Chicken tax. What is the chicken tax? In a nutshell, the chicken tax is this. In the 70s, Germany ate a lot of chicken. Turns out they were importing all their chicken from the United States. The German government said, screw that, we want them buying German chicken, so they put a large tax on chicken imported from the United States into Germany. so that it was cheaper to buy German chicken. All right, the Americans got ticked off. They said, well, screw you, we're going to put a tax on all light trucks coming into the United States. All right, that's why so few companies sell pickup trucks in the United States outside of companies that build them here. All right, you think about it, there are a bunch of companies that have pickup trucks that sell them elsewhere that don't sell them here. That's why it's too expensive to get them in. It puts them out of the range of what consumers are going to pay for a pickup truck. All right, now Tacomas would be a heck of a lot less expensive if it was not for this chicken tax. If Toyota has a plant in the United States in the late 80s, early 90s, they can make more trucks, sell them cheaper, sell them here. That is absolutely what they would do with the Comanche. So I do believe that the Comanche would carry on next to the Toyota Tacoma, and they'd be built in the same plant in Toledo, Ohio or something. Now the Wagoneer goes away in 1993 as it normally would in our timeline. Then it's brought back on either the 100 series Land Cruiser in 98 or on the 200 series Land Cruiser in 2007. And then the Wagoneer, the Jeep Wagoneer and the Toyota Land Cruiser, they progress together as a side-by-side. That's interesting because the Land Cruiser is already an off-roading beast. I don't know that they upgrade the off-road features for the Jeep version, but they definitely give Jeep a version of the Land Cruiser. And I don't respect very many Toyota vehicles. I do respect the Land Cruiser. Those things, Land Cruisers, the first couple generations of 4Runners, those are some bad-ass vehicles for sure. All right, goes without saying that the 4-liter goes away. What is it? The 3VZ-E V6 that they put in the 4Runners and everything, that's what all the Jeeps get. They probably get some small 4-cylinder options and maybe some diesel options, but for the most part, that is what they get instead of the 4-liter. We already talked about solid front axles. Toyota's not going to put solid front axles in vehicles, all right? Most of the models are merged with Toyota brands by the mid-2000s, and they're all independent front suspension. I think the brand does fine going through after the year 2000. I don't think the recession hits them very hard. I think we get some other vehicles, maybe a Jeep version of the Toyota Matrix, which was a smaller wagony type, not really a wagon, I guess it's a hatchback type thing, maybe an all-wheel drive Matrix, possibly a Sequoia. Maybe instead of the Land Cruiser, the Wagoneer goes on the Sequoia platform, which is essentially a Toyota Suburban, really. Possibly a Gladiator type pickup based on the Tundra, which would be really cool. I think Jeep does fine underneath Toyota. I don't think Toyota has any interest in selling it. I think it helps Toyota sell even more in the United States, and it would make that a merger like that, knowing how big the Jeep brand could be going into 2018, Toyota could do a lot with Jeep, and this could be the most profitable landing spot for the Jeep brand. Let's go on to the last option. The last possibility of the 5 we're going to discuss is that an independent company buys Jeep. And what I mean by that is just some guy, not another automaker, it's just somebody or some company buys Jeep, and Jeep is a standalone company now. Think Mitsubishi, you know, not owned by anybody, maybe influenced, maybe partnerships here and there, but their own thing. Jeep becomes its own thing. All right, what would that look like? The Wrangler is going to be the flagship. That's going to be the halo car, 100%. It's going to stay as its own platform. It's going to progress much the way it did in our timeline. You're going to keep the 4-liter for a lot longer because an independent company isn't necessarily going to have the money or the capital to develop a whole new motor. So we have to go and find one from somebody else. I don't think we take the 3.7 or the 3.6 Pentastar from Chrysler. Maybe we get something from Chevy, like the 4.3 or the 5.3 potentially. Maybe we get that awful 5-cylinder from Chevy. I don't know, but as our own company, the 4-liter stays the same, and things just stay much closer to how they were with AMC. Same thing with the Grand Cherokee. The ZJ's released. It goes on. The WJ comes as it would have. Again, the V8 options that we had in the Grand Cherokees, where's that V8 going to come from? Do we even have that V8 option? We would have to. I don't think an independent company is going to be able to develop their own V8 necessarily. We probably get one from one of the big 3 automakers in the United States. So maybe we end up with the same 4.7 from Chrysler. Maybe we get a 5.3. Maybe we get a 5-liter. Who knows? But I do think there would still be V8 options that would just come from somewhere else. Cherokee lives the same life, though I don't know that it gets refresh in 97 the way it did. It probably just keeps on selling as is and then is killed off at the natural point. And the Cherokee's not really killed off. That's what Americans don't understand. The Cherokee, the Liberty, so you got the XJ's Gen 1 Cherokee, then it's killed in 2001, and the Liberty takes over. Everywhere else besides the United States, North America, the Liberty is called the Cherokee. The Liberty is the successor of the Cherokee. That's the Gen 2 Cherokee everywhere else, which is why it's so weird that they then brought the other one, the 2015 one in, because then the line doesn't make sense. But if you're over in Europe, you know the Liberty as the Cherokee. I think that all goes as it would. Wagoneer possibly lasts for a little bit. Maybe we produce it as a unibody family car to try to diversify our line. It all depends on how well Jeep continues selling into the 90s, how much capital this new independent company really has. I think most likely we keep things the same, and that's just how it stays. Independent front suspension does not come in possibly at all. I think we keep much more of our Jeep identity. The reason Jeeps got a little softer, if you will, in the early 2000s was partially because of the merger between Daimler and Chrysler. Daimler's influencing Chrysler to make their vehicles more user-friendly to people who aren't necessarily off-road enthusiasts, and obviously that affects things like independent front suspension, things like body on frame production. I think everything stays the same. This independent company thrives through the 90s when these SUVs are going crazy. The problem comes in the 2000s. I don't see a way that an independent company that only sells SUVs survives the 2008 recession. We talked about in the other video how for most of the 2000s, SUV was a dirty word. They're gas guzzlers. You can't afford to buy them, you can't afford to put gas in them, and they're ruining the environment anyway. And a mentality like that kills a company that only sells SUVs. So this independent Jeep brand does not survive. Now, do they get purchased by someone? Is this another Daimler situation where they end up on Chrysler anyway? Possibly. Maybe one of the other landing spots we talked about. There have always been companies interested in buying Jeep because even though they may not appeal to everyone, they appeal to a lot of people. And there are a lot of people like me who will not let anything else in the driveway. Though sometimes I let Subarus in. Sometimes I'll buy a Subaru. But for the most part, we just do Jeep. And that loyalty means that the Jeep brand, it's going to be hard to kill it altogether. I think the only timeline we discussed where the Jeep brand definitively gets killed off, the GM line. That is the darkest timeline. What I'd love to know from you guys, as we are now done with all 5 alternate timelines, which one was your favorite? Which one was your least favorite? Which one would you like to live in? And do you see any other possible landing spaces? I worked on this for about 5 months. I've been doing research. Since the Golden Age of Jeep video, when I really started thinking about the alternate history aspect of where would this brand have gone if Lee Iacocca did not get Chrysler to purchase it, and I believe that I've laid out the 5 most likely options. I don't see other car companies, Volvo, Honda, being as interested as the 5 we talked about. But I do want to know what you guys think. Leave me a comment down there in the squawk boxes. I hope you enjoyed the video, both of them. I hope you watched both of them. If you did, by all means, like the video, subscribe to the channel for more ridiculous, harebrained rambling like this. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.